The storm rose before dawn like a choir without voices, only breath and the hush of waiting bells. Nyra stood at the lip of the desert where Dawnspire's sandstone towers leaned with the wind as if listening, and she tried to match their patience. The air smelled of cold copper and bruised rain. Somewhere inside that hush, a memory unfurled, not hers, older than maps, older than vows. It spoke in feelings rather than words, a pulse that tugged the heart to stillness. Master Talon had told her that the first awakening was not a flare but a softening, that the Force made room before it made light. She felt that room open now and feared stepping into it. Luma 7 hovered close, dimming their glow in respect for the hour. A thin line of dawn ignited the dune's rim. The echo breathed again, like a tide returning to a beach that no longer expected it, and Nyra let her shoulders fall as if lowering a blade she had never drawn. The echo found language not in words, but in a patient rhythm, like a hand tapping a lullaby on the ribs of the world. Nyra stood in the scriptorium doorway and felt the pulse match her breathing until fear had no handle to hold. Master Talon spoke softly, and it sounded like stone learning to sing. He told her to let the echo pass through, to become a doorway with both sides open, to trust that what wished to be remembered would stay. She thought of all the names she had not said aloud, the small kindnesses that slipped under history's fence. The storm thinned to a silver mist, drifting through the cloister arches. Luma 7 spun a slow orbit, light as a moth, recording without interrupting. In that quiet, Nyra realized the first awakening might have been the courage to listen to someone weaker than silence. They climbed to the weather terrace where dunes folded like sleeping beasts, and the bell ropes streamed seaward, as though the storm were an ocean remembering its shore. Kale arrived last, sand in his lashes, and a grin he pretended not to wear. He spoke of a flicker on the horizon, a ship or a mirage, and Nyra felt the echo lean toward that direction, like grass toward light. Talon did not command. He listened, then nodded. And in that nod, Nyra felt the weight of 1,000 unshouted orders. The terrace stones warmed beneath their feet as the sun lifted. Luma 7 hummed low, charting the storm's after currents like a healer reading a pulse. The heartbeat in Nyra's ears softened into something steady enough to stand on, not a blaze, a path. They prepared without hurry. Provisions were wrapped in weathercloth, flasks refilled at the cistern that tasted of old limestone and newer rain. Talon chose no weapon beyond his staff. Kale checked the sky again, that habit of counting exits in a landscape with none. Nyra tied back her short hair and touched the saber she had carried, but never craved. Luma 7 bobbed between them like a lantern that forgot it was supposed to be a tool. The monastery exhaled around them. Bells hung still but felt awake. In the quiet of packing, Nyra heard the echo settle into a rhythm that made room for footsteps. She realized the storm had not called her to conquer anything. It had invited her to keep the story gentle, even if the road ahead wasn't. They set out along the lee of the dunes where the wind softened its voice, following a seam of black glass that ran like a scar toward the horizon. The sky had rinsed to a high blue, and the monastery dwindled behind them until it was only the sound of bells that might have been memory. Nyra felt the echo lift and settle with each footfall, as if testing her balance before trusting it. Talon's stride was steady, a kindness to those who walked with him. Kale ranged ahead and back, orbiting like a moon that refused to be caught. Luma 7 sang a barely audible tone that kept time with their breathing. When the glass seam deepened to a fissure, cool air rose from the dark, and the echo grew clear enough to touch. Nyra did not reach. She opened. The aurora moth rose from the horizon as if the desert had dreamed it, and then forgotten to wake. Hull ribs arched like the bones of a cathedral, but vines had claimed the corridors and pinned stars to the ceiling with patient light. When Nyra crossed the threshold, she felt gravity smooth her pulse, a kindness she had not asked for. Master Talon rested his hand on the bulkhead and thanked a ship that could not bow. Kale whistled low, the sound swallowed by leaves that breathed their answer. Luma 7 drifted forward, a lantern in a green dusk, and the echo within Nira tilted toward the heartwood decks where rain fell without clouds. She moved softly, learning the cadence of floor plates that sang underfoot. The ship kept histories inside soft moss and salt-sweet air, and somewhere deeper than engines an old promise turned its face toward them. Discovery did not rush. It waited like water in a cupped hand. They found the Arboretum, where decks bowed into terraces and branches, met railings like neighbors swapping rumors. Rain stitched itself between gravity pockets and silver threads that rose and fell without falling, and the echo inside Naira leaned until she nearly leaned with it. Luma 7 opened a panel with a tone that could have been a lullaby, and a moth of light unfolded, a map of the ship's memory. Figures walked that map like shadows cast by leaves. Talon named none of them. He let the quiet give them titles. Kale brushed a fern with his wrist, and water leapt from its fronds to become a drifting sphere that mirrored his grin. The projection steadied on an encrypted fragment that felt older than the ship. Naira listened, and the fragment listened back, both waiting to be brave at the same time. The fragment unlocked with the sound of seeds cracking in spring soil. Words shaped themselves from breath and leaf shadow. Not an origin myth, a memory of a single corridor where a child had once cried and someone had chosen to listen. Naira felt the decision lift from the floor plates and settle into her palms, an answer that arrived as tenderness rather than thunder. Talon's eyes warmed the way sandstone remembers sunrise after noon has passed. Kale grew very still, his restlessness kneeling to respect a story that did not show its teeth. Luma 7 dimmed to keep the letters bright. The echo folded around the memory like a cloak, and Naira understood why the first awakening could hide inside a small kindness. She did not know what battle this would help them win. She only knew a gentler blade had just been offered. A caretaker garden waited deeper in the ship, vines trained into braids that held little bells of glass. Each bell carried a breath collected by passengers long gone. When Nira walked between them, the bells answered the ship's slow pulse, and the corridor became a choir of ordinary exhalations, rising like fog. She thought of the child in the corridor and the one who stopped. She thought of how choosing gentleness builds rooms where fear forgets the door. Talon let the bells pass over his knuckles and smiled without showing teeth. Kale closed his eyes and let the sound erase the map of exits he kept behind them. Luma 7 recorded quietly, then cut the feed as if to preserve the privacy of that hush. The ship had not grown a forest to impress. It had done so to cradle breaths that needed saving. When they reached the Heartwood deck, the rain had gathered itself into a lake that never touched the floor. It turned with the ship's breath and wrote a slow circle of light on the ceiling. Naira stepped close and saw faces in the curve that were not ghosts but moments. A pair of hands releasing a cup, a tired back finding a chair, the first saber unlit on a table, while someone chose to hold another's fear instead. The echo settled in her chest and became a vow that needed no language. Talon bowed to the lake, which bowed back by lowering its shine. Kale laughed once, almost shy, then pocketed his impatience for later. Luma 7 pinged a gentle tone that felt like approval. They left the chamber as quietly as they had entered, carrying a seed they could not see, and a path that did not require haste. Zephyra rose out of the weather like a thought that learned to float. Gardens hung from silver ribs, and mist braided itself into ribbons that drifted across balconies where wind bells spoke a language of gentleness. Naira felt the city's patience as a hand beneath an unsteady step. The echo within her unclenched and spread thin as silk over the chasms. Master Talon breathed with the updraft until his robes settled into the same rhythm as the clouds. Kale leaned out over a vapor bridge and laughed softly. When the air held him, the sound carried away and returned sweeter. Luma 7 dimmed to a candle and mapped the currents so lightly that nothing stirred. The people of Zephyra moved with quiet competence, each gesture tied to another by invisible filament. Somewhere across the span, a tremor translated into a whispered warning. The city was asking for trust, not speed. The warning became a shiver that moved through lattice and rope and palm until it touched the arches under their feet. A mist engine coughed somewhere under the gardens, and one of the main bridges lowered its voice to a strained whisper. Naira closed her eyes and let her balance float on the echo's surface. She felt a pattern like braided hair loosened by a single strand. Talon spoke softly, and the words became anchors that weighed nothing at all. Kale's focus sharpened, the soldier turning listener, the corners of his restlessness folding down. Luma 7 translated the city's requests into a pulse that matched their breathing. People gathered with the quick calm of practiced neighbors, not heroes seeking a stage. Lines were unspooled, knots tested. The tremor answered by settling into a steady quiver that promised to hold if hands would meet at the right places. A child ran where even careful feet should walk, and the bridge answered with a bow too deep. The world tilted, and a small figure slid toward the edge with a silent gasp that somehow made more sound than any shout. Kale moved before thought could argue, body learning the grammar of the city in a single breath. Naira reached without reaching, and found the echo lifting the bridge's next exhale just enough. Talon's words braided with the wind until the loose strand found a partner. Luma 7 flashed once to mark the path that would not fail. The child collided with Kale's chest, and fear spilled out of both of them and vanished like breath on cold glass. The city shivered again, this time like a laugh trying to remember how. The crowd exhaled, then quietly returned to the work of keeping the air trustworthy. Ropes crossed the span like music staves, and hands became notes that knew where to land. Naira mirrored the city's pulse until her own steadiness climbed into the chords and softened their complaint. Kale settled into the rhythm beside her, breath and muscle adding weight where it was wanted, and none where it was not. Talon spoke with the foreman in a language that had fewer verbs and more listening, their silence doing most of the repair. Luma 7 kept time with a glow that rose and fell like the gentlest metronome. The bridge held, not because force won, but because no hand insisted on being the only one. The echo that had led them here felt warm as tea, cupped in both palms. When the last knot sighed into place, the mist thinned, and the canyon below revealed cloud gardens drifting like ships at anchor. Evening softened Zephyra until every surface seemed to remember a kindness. Lanterns found their places among vines, and the repaired bridge hummed with a note that promised it would not surprise anyone tonight. Naira sat on a low wall and let quiet spread from her spine into the stones. Kale joined her without swagger. The child he had caught waving shyly from a doorway before being swept into a family's arms. Talon stood near the wind bells and did nothing except be grateful with his whole breath. Luma 7 drifted close and dimmed further, as if respecting a story that wanted to sleep. The echo rested in Naira like a cat that had decided this lap would do. Trust had been the answer. Mercy had been the method. The city settled, and in settling taught them that holding is another word for listening with both hands. Karth received them with a sky the color of a bruise that will not fade. Glass plains stretched like frozen thunderheads, and the wind tasted of lightning's ash. The archaeology lights burned amber in tidy grids, as if order could be planted and coaxed to grow. Naira felt the echo twist under her ribs, not unkind yet burdened, like a river forced through a narrow gate. Master Talon walked softly, as if not to wake a sleeping wound. Kale's stride lengthened with the old restlessness, his eyes measuring distances that could hold harm. Luma 7 dimmed themselves to a candle's hush, and the pit ladders rang like thin bells under careful feet. The first chamber breathed cold when the hatch opened. Somewhere below the noise of generators, another rhythm waited. It was almost a heartbeat, almost a clock, almost a promise that would cost more than it seemed. The ruin did not greet them. It listened. The first hall opened into a vault, where the floor had broken like ice around a black circle of stone. Patterns crawled its surface with the patience of vines, but none were alive. Naira knelt, and the echo leaned toward the circle as if recognizing a former name. Talon traced air above the markings and spoke a blessing that used more silence than sound. Kale prowled the rim and found a niche where metal had folded itself into a mask shaped like a listening face. The air cooled when he saw it. Luma 7 cast a lattice of light that revealed hairline fractures crossing the chamber like decisions made too quickly. Then the other voice arrived, late to its own sentence, warm and wrong at once. It called itself Mercy, and promised a future unbothered by chance. Naira felt the word future narrow to a blade, and knew the room had been waiting for a mouth to say yes. The Sovereign spoke again, and the words arrived as comfort-wearing armor made of certainty. It offered Kale a clean corridor through time where no child fell, and no bridge needed mending. A small price, it said. Only the pruning of noise. Naira listened with the part of her that had learned to hear fear before it grew teeth, and she felt the offer press against Kale's oldest bruise. Talon did not forbid. He told a story about waves choosing shorelines, about how even mercy changes shape when it refuses to bend. Kale's jaw softened and then set. The echo in Nira backed away as if giving space to a decision that could not be learned for him. Luma 7 dimmed their recorders without being asked. The mask waited in the niche, like a second moon fallen to hand height. The chamber pulled a little tighter around each breath. He took the mask because the future it promised sounded like quiet without cost. When it sealed to his skin, the chamber stepped backward by half a breath. Kale spoke, and his voice came after the shape of his mouth, a delayed tide that made truth stumble. The Sovereign's presence sharpened, pleased, without smiling. Naira said his name and placed each letter on the floor like stones to cross a river. Talon asked him what price he wished paid and by whom. The echo inside Naira gathered like rain in a bowl and would not overflow. Luma 7 brightened a fraction, a lantern choosing to be brave. Kale looked at his friends through a new horizon, and for a heartbeat the old softness returned, then shuddered as if wind had found the door. The ruin exhaled, satisfied to have turned listening into leverage. The storm outside began to move. Night took the dig site and turned the lamps into small moons that could not find each other. Kale walked toward the surface with steps that made no sound inside Naira's memory, the delay of his voice trailing like a shadow that had learned to speak. The Sovereign waited at the hatch, and the wind bowed to it without affection. Talon placed his hand on Naira's shoulder, and the word patience became warmer than the air. She thought of bridges held by shared weight, of a lake that turned without falling, of a storm that asked for gentleness first. The echo steadied. Love does not chase to conquer, it follows to remember. Luma 7 hovered closer as if to be chosen by gravity. When Kale did not look back, Naira did not break. She shaped the silence into a promise and set it down where he would find it when the mask needed a place to rest. The Lhasa met them with a horizon that never kept still. The sea turned like a giant heart, and every swell lifted the sky a little closer before setting it down again with care. Naira stood on the basalt needle where the lighthouse temple clung and felt the echo move inside her like tide through a cave. Master Talon closed his eyes and matched his breath to the slow bell that sounded from deep within the rock. Luma 7 traced a circle of light along the parapet and dimmed, a courtesy to the dusk that was arriving in lavender and pearl. The wind carried a salt sweetness that softened the edge of every thought. Somewhere far beyond the twilit water, a ship moved without lights, and Naira knew it was Kale's path folding around the world like an unanswered letter. She let the ache rise and fall. The ocean gave it room. The vow she had learned on the living ship began to hum again, patient as undertow. Pilgrims had built the lighthouse temple to measure forgiveness in turns of light. Naira and Talon entered its round chamber, where a lantern swung from a chain and painted slow moons along the walls. The echo curved with the lamp's arc until it touched a listening place in her chest and stayed. Talon spoke of surrender as skill rather than defeat, of the courage it takes to end what should end and keep what must remain rough enough to breathe. Naira thought of Kale's voice arriving late, of bridges held by many hands, of lakes that turned without falling. She set her palms on the cool stone and felt the sea reply with patient pressure. The room carried old salt and beeswax and the faintest sweetness of fruit, offered by travelers long gone. Luma 7 kept the lamp's rhythm in their glow, a metronome that never insisted. In that gentle swing, the fear under Naira's ribs loosened its jaw. Night laid a velvet hush over the water, and with it, the sovereign's voice arrived like a star pretending to be close. It offered safety as a straight line that cut the sea into obedient halves. Naira stepped out onto the storm gallery where waves struck the rock and sighed back into themselves. She did not argue. She listened until the offer sounded like iron in her mouth, and the echo answered with the taste of clean rain. Talon stood behind her, a warmth at her back that asked nothing but presence. Luma 7 rotated, scanning the horizon, then stilled as if a choice could be harmed by too much measuring. The wind lifted and the lanterns below drew rings on the black water. Naira let the night see her fear and did not hurry it away. The ocean took it without judging and returned a smaller tide, one that fit the curve of her ribs. The mask would tire. The sea would wait. Before dawn, the keepers opened the tide room, a chamber below the lantern where water rose and fell through a throat in the rock. Naira descended with Talon and let the room's breathing teach her. Each surge lifted a chorus of wind flutes hidden in the walls, and each retreat left silence shaped exactly like welcome. She set the unlit saber on a ledge and watched its metal learn the color of the sea. The echo gathered until it became almost a sound, then settled into a steady weight that felt like hands supporting her spine. Talon smiled with his eyes and said nothing more. Luma 7 drifted over the pool and produced a faint grid that folded itself away, embarrassed to be helpful where listening was enough. Naira whispered a promise the room did not need, and the room replied by keeping it. She would not close the world to save it. She would open and let it choose to breathe. The first light of morning unstitched the horizon and sewed it back with gold thread. Naira climbed to the lantern walk and watched the sea turn gentle as if remembering a lullaby. The ache of Kale's absence no longer shouted. It breathed like the tide she had learned. She understood then that surrender was not laying down the blade in defeat, but choosing where to place it so its ending could be kind. The echo settled into clarity, a bell tone that did not need the bell. Talon joined her and smiled in that small way that felt like dawn warming a windowsill. Luma 7 floated between them with a soft approval that did not preen. Somewhere far to the west, a vessel's wake drew a slow line that promised return without demanding it. Naira touched the railing and let the ocean carry her vow outward, until even the horizon could hear it and rest. They left Thalassa aboard a wind chime freighter whose hull sang to turbulence the way a reed bed answers river breath. Stars thinned to a quiet snowfall as the ship slipped into the dark between roots. Naira stood in the meditative bay and let the dim starlight pool on the floor like shallow water. Master Talon entered without sound and set his staff aside, as if laying a story down to show its spine. He told her there is a blade that does not win, it concludes. He spoke of endings chosen as gifts for the living, of doors closed gently so sleep can happen. Luma 7 settled upon the vented ceiling like a patient lantern. Naira unhooked her saber and felt the memory of all the times she could have ignited it, and did not. The echo gathered as if cupping her hands from within. The vow was not an oath to strike, but to notice when striking would erase a kindness that could still be kept. They rebuilt her saber in the engine chapel where resonant coils hummed like whales remembering. Talon asked her to breathe until sound and breath matched, then to name nothing, not even fear. With the casing open, the crystal inside flickered like a moth refusing a jar. Naira did not command it. She offered it a place to rest. The echo wrapped around her wrists and taught her to hold the tool, the way one holds a tear that needs company more than wiping. Luma 7 recorded frequencies, and then turned the recorder off at Talon's nod. The ship's song deepened. Past and future stopped jostling for her attention and stood side by side like friends who wished her well. When she closed the casing, the saber felt lighter, as if it had found its own decision. The vow settled in her chest like a bell whose tone continued after silence returned, a note that knew where to go without pushing. A message arrived across the dark with its voice misplaced behind it. Kale's image stood in the calm alcove, mouth forming Nira's name, and the sound arriving half a heartbeat later, that familiar ache of delay. He spoke of a corridor cleared of mishap, a future with no loose ends, and the way the Sovereign's mercy cleaned the air of grief. Nyra listened until the temptation sounded like a room without windows. She thanked him for saving the child on the bridge, and for the way he always counted exits when others forgot. She told him she would rather live with drafts and uneven floors than sleep in a sealed museum of unbroken things. Talon said only, "You are loved here," to a face that could not hear in time. Luma 7 stabilized the flicker and then let it waver. The transmission ended like a sigh that could not decide who it belonged to. Nyra did not argue with the absence. She set a chair for it. They practiced the vow as movement, not combat. In the freight bay, cargo nets became constellations that shifted when asked. Talon taught her to step aside without abandonment, to catch without capturing, to let momentum discover gentleness. Nyra learned the shape of refusal that still felt like welcome. She closed the distance to a swinging crate and set its motion into a softer orbit. The echo approved by vanishing into her breath, until she could not tell which was which. Luma 7 timed each sequence and then erased their own data, trusting memory to grow kinder when not cornered. The ship drifted out of hyperspace near a silver arc that rode itself across the dark like dawn, waiting to be invited. Palaquin shimmered, fleets pricking at its edges like gnats around a sleeping giant. Nyra rested the unlit saber against her palm and felt it as a punctuation mark that could end a sentence without making it shout. Night pooled at one edge of the ring world, while morning gathered at the other, a horizon taught to curl. The freighter slowed and the captain dimmed the cabin as one dims a room where someone has finally fallen asleep. Talon stood with Nyra at the observation blister and said the saber is for endings, but endings are choices too. She felt the vow sit in her like a tide that knows the moon. Not victory, not surrender to force, but surrender to the truth that the full, messy timeline needed protecting from the comfort of a single immaculate story. Luma 7 recorded one last frame and sent it to a secure corner of the future. Nyra touched the glass and imagined it was water. Somewhere out there, Kale was walking a corridor that claimed to be kind. She would meet him with memory instead of battle. The quiet blade rested at her side, already answering the next question with a gentler one. Palaquin held its breath where night and morning touched, a silver bow strung with ships that glittered like thoughts not yet spoken. Nyra felt the ring world's hush pour through the freighter's bones until every rivet learned to be gentle. The fleets assembled with the solemn choreography of storms deciding which way to turn. The Sovereign's doctrine arrived on encrypted channels as a kindness sharpened to a point, promising an end to error if all futures would kneel. Talon rested a palm on the observation rail and let silence gather where commands usually grow. Luma 7 thinned their light to a thread and listened for the small heartbeat inside the loud machinery of purpose. Nyra closed her eyes and found the lake in the ship that never fell, the bridge that hummed because many hands agreed, the desert bells waking to weather's name. She breathed until the saber felt lighter than regret. The final battle would not be a place to win, it would be a place to sleep. The Sovereign spoke first, a voice that arrived after its intention like thunder following a flash you never saw. It offered a corridor through time so clean it would make grief obsolete. Kale's fighter slid from the carrier's shadow and took its place on a vector that led through Nyra's ribs as if her breath were a gate. He hailed her with the delay that had become his signature bruise. She answered with the steadiness she had learned from tides and old stones, telling the channel a story about a child on a bridge and the weight distributed by uncounted hands. Talon did not argue angles. He asked the fleets to lower their voices until they could hear the rings hum. Luma 7 relayed a map not of positions but of courtesies remembered and debts already forgiven. The vector bent a fraction. The sovereign's silence sharpened. Nira let the echo lift like a lantern and placed it where a blade would normally go. Engagement began like rain deciding which roofs to bless. Shots probed and then apologized as they passed. Nira did not fire. She opened. Memory streamed across the channel in a cadence older than orders. The desert bell that did not strike. The water that turned without falling. The bridge that held when 100 small kindnesses chose the same timing. She spoke Kale's name as if it were a door quiet enough to sleep near. The sovereign advanced through silence, pruning probabilities so the field narrowed to a corridor lined with empty frames. Talon's voice filled those frames with ordinary breaths collected by a ship that once grew a forest to cradle them. Luma 7 wove the breaths into a low drone like a lullaby hummed by engines. The corridor quivered. Kale's delay thickened until his words trailed him like fog. Nira reached with neither hand nor blade and asked his oldest vigilance to rest. The sovereign unfolded at last into a shape the eye could confess to. It bridged 2 carrier spines with a veil of ordered light and tried to hush the ring itself. Nira unstrapped and stepped into the courier's small airlock where the world narrowed to breath and vow. Talon placed the saber in her palms as one sets a candle in another's night. She ignited nothing. She opened the blade inside the memory. Instead, letting its conclusion travel as warmth through the channel until metal forgot to be stern. Luma 7 spooled the lullaby to every ship with speakers still loyal to sleep. Kale's fighter dropped from attack to hover, the mask inside him looking for a weather it could understand. Nira spoke the moment he had caught a child, and the bridge had answered by holding. She asked the mask whether it wished to keep standing forever, or to be allowed to rest like any faithful guard at shift's end. The ring listened. Day climbed over night and did not push. It invited. Kale removed the mask not with a flourish, but with the care one uses to set down a sleeping child. The delay loosened its grip until his voice and breath found each other again like friends who had thought they were late. The sovereign trembled, a kindness that had forgotten its softness, and Harlequin offered it a place in the dark where tired brightness can sleep. Nira lowered the unlit blade and felt the vow complete itself without heat. Talon's shoulders eased as bells inside the desert of her memory found their old wind. Luma 7 dimmed to archival hush and stored a recording labeled simply the gentler ending. The fleets drifted apart with the relief of weather that has decided to be rain later. The final battle did not close with a cheer. It exhaled. The galaxy, hearing itself breathe, chose to keep doing so.